how many units do I have on the screen right now? Now, this is Company of Heroes 2, and for those of you who are familiar with that, you might be able to deduce, even pretty quickly maybe, that I have exactly this many units on the screen. If you're not familiar with Company of Heroes 2, you might be just counting them, each individual guy, and that would be incorrect. I would need to explain to you that a unit or a squad is comprised of multiple little guys here on the screen. 4 to 6 guys could equal one squad, depending on what squad it is. And then very quickly you can say, well, it's a little muddied, isn't it? To tell exactly who's who and what's what. And now visually we can sort of get into it and see that this guy right here, he's wearing this color camo, and this guy right here, he's wearing kind of a different colored camo, and this guy's clearly got a bazooka, and this guy's got a brown backpack, and not everyone has a brown backpack. There are ways to visually tell a difference. Keep in mind, we're zoomed in here. And this is the fundamental problem that all three of the Company of Hero games is going to have, is that the differentiation visually of all units. Unit clarity. Now don't get me wrong, this is not a Company of Heroes 3 bash, not a one-to-one review for graphics, but talking about a fundamental game design that Company of Hero games suffer from. Unit clarity, visually, and also we'll talk about to some degree how the game has to sort of like struggle and deal with differentiating units gameplay wise. Now, comparatively to like StarCraft, you control way more units than you would ever control in a single game of Company of Heroes. They don't have these issues. Other RTS games don't seem to have these issues. Why is it a Company of Heroes problem? For the sake of the devs, we can appreciate that it's a World War II themed game. And I'm not saying that these games are particularly historically accurate, but World War II was definitely referenced in the making of these three games, this particular franchise, right? And so we got soldiers wearing camo. It's a part of the aesthetic, the theme. Company of Heroes is really known for, in my opinion, being that cinematic experience. So try and really engross yourself into a simulated World War II battle where you're basically the commander at the helm, making decisions and leading your faction to victory. The ironic nature of that, though, is in order to keep that illusion, you got to dress the soldiers up in what would make sense for World War II. And what do soldiers wear? They wear camouflage. Like that's their uniforms. Uniforms are camouflage typically in most military services way back then, and they do it today. And so, just by natural design of making a World War II styled game and keeping in that theme, you have soldiers that end up sort of looking like this. They all kind of look the same to a degree, and obviously, I'm sure there was a lot of effort to help these units differentiate themselves visually, but it's definitely a problem, and especially if you're not familiar with Company of Heroes. And I know that this is a problem because we can tell by the UI design. I had 4 squads there, exactly 4 squads here. But the UI design here, to solve this problem of visually understanding which squad of units is which, are these cards right here. These unit cards, these unit plates, these whatever you might want to call them. This is UI designed to help the player to differentiate between which squad of infantry is which, and that will eventually lead to you understanding which is better at doing this and blah, blah, blah. But you can sort of see how that naturally bleeds into the gameplay issue of like, if it's hard to tell what squad of infantry is which, it becomes hard to differentiate between, oh, this squad of infantry is good versus vehicles, and this one's not, and this one can be upgraded, and blah, blah, blah. So it's a problem. And it's a problem even though we can clearly see that they have a solution by plating or putting the squads into these sort of plates with the symbols that represent them. Why is it still a problem, though? It's one, the learning curve. Granted, every game has some measure of learning curves. RTS games are not really known for having the best learning curves, especially if you're going to be playing online against other human beings. People are not friendly. They will just crush you if that's the case. Not friendly like they'll trash talk you. They'll just play the game and they'll beat you and there'll be no remorse because winning means that they're They're smart. RTS, right? Strategy. So it hurts the learning curve here. And again, granted, it's for all games, but again, it's you have to deal with UI. The more that you can visually represent what a unit does, the faster a player will learn as far as remembering it, right? You visually see a unit and you go, oh, that's a big, strong orc with an axe. He's going to punch me with it. You remember that faster. You just learn quicker. It's like essentially like having a visual aid, and the visual aid here is pretty weak. And in fact, it ends up being sort of abstracted by the unit plates because they're just symbols to then represent the units. You then have to learn what the symbol means, right? You don't really learn visually what a squad is. You learn visually through the nameplate. This helps. This hurts. So this hurts the learning curve. It also hurts for spectators, for them to fully understand what the hell is going on. It helps, again, just all part of that learning curve. And again, everything is abstracted down to these symbols. Start to see here more clearly. It's a little blurry, right? Everything is abstracted down to the symbols, and on top is the infantry, and bottom are the vehicles differentiated through their unit plates. And funny enough, you can sort of tell by the vehicle symbols, they're even more abstract. With the infantry, you can sort of see like, okay, we got like a V, and this V's got a little some machine gun above it. So like these units are probably like in the same category, but like one is not submachine gun and one is submachine guns, and this one's got a whatever the cross on it, and oh well look, this one's got a bazooka underneath it, and this one's got this stick, and this one's got a stick with a flame coming out of it, so that must be a fire stick. We'll call it a flamethrower, right? And things like that. And for the heavy machine gun, right, it's kind of more explanatory. Lots of bullets for machine gun. But you can see again, it's all this problem is fixed with UI, but it's still abstracted into. And it gets even worse for vehicles visually when it comes to these nameplates because the vehicle differences in these nameplates are pretty nuanced. Can you really tell the difference between these three tanks? This one's got a little shield in the middle of it. What does that mean? Tell me if you can sort of like see the tank with the shield. Can you visualize the tank with the shield here? Now, granted, you can see it. Oh, yeah, my camera's blocking it. But here are the vehicles. Again, we're zoomed in, and we can very quickly tell that between these two vehicles over here on the left, they're like a Jeep, half track. They're clearly different. What about the three tanks? Can you tell which three of these tanks is more powerful? Which three of these tanks is the more expensive top tier tank, and which of these tanks is not quite so good? Which of these tanks is specialized versus light vehicles, and which of these tanks can fight heavy tanks? And again, it's just abstracted. Visually, yes, we can tell that there are three different vehicles here. But it might be kind of hard to remember exactly where this tank fits into the tech tree, where this tank sort of fits into the food chain of the battlefield as far as which tank beats which and things like that. And again, it just all adds to the difficulty of that learning curve. But what about Company of Heroes 3 visually? Again, we're not comparing one to one here necessarily, but it's just an interesting idea as far as how the devs are making progress or not as far as dealing with this clear and obvious problem of unit clarity, understanding what unit does what and how they fit into the food chain of it all. Now, keep in mind, let's back up. Keep in mind the visuals that I'm about to show you. The game has not been fully released. These visuals are not the final product, from my understanding, but we get a pretty clear understanding and idea of what's going to be happening here. But let's give it a little bit of credit. The game has not been actually released yet. They still have time to fix things, visual, sound stuff. That can all be fixed to some degree, right? Here's Company of Heroes 3. Which of these tanks are stronger? Which of these tanks and these vehicles, you can sort of clearly see, like, oh yeah, the Jeep is probably, lower tier, it's faster probably, and it doesn't have a big cannon on it, blah, blah, blah. Again, though, we can kind of just see that this game's going to have, for the most part, the same issue. Now, I will give credit to some degree, like these squads of infantry, I would say, are far more easier to differentiate visually. Colors are popping out, clearly more defined. You know, this guy's got a blue handkerchief. He's been watching Scooby Doo. But ultimately, it's going to be the same problem. Because again, here we're zoomed in. This is not going to be the view that you're going to be experiencing. You can zoom out. You can go watch Company of Heroes 3 gameplay from the tech test. And you can pretty quickly see that again, it's going to be soldiers in camouflage running around on a sand or dirt battlefield. The destruction turns the ground into more dirt, essentially. There's going to be an issue as far as players understanding exactly how to tell the difference between their squads. And the solution is actually the same. They're going to just have the same nameplate system in Company of Heroes 3. Again, we're not reviewing it, we're not bashing it, but there really hasn't been any innovation in this particular area of the game's fundamental problems. I'm still looking forward to playing it though, right? But kind of an interesting thing here is that to some degree, though, we can see that the colors have sort of popped out with these sort of graphical updates to some degree. Um, and funny enough, the more they tried to make the colors pop out, the more the community backlashed them because to some degree it did sort of end up making a lot of the units look like plastic. Very colorful, kind of cartoony. And I can appreciate to some degree that that could hurt the cinematic experience, but at the same time, can you appreciate that at least the devs are aware of this problem and the devs tried to help fix that problem by enhancing colors and changing the graphics and changing the textures on units and things like that? They tried. They tried to do something different to help this problem, or at least have something in conjunction with the nameplate system to assist in helping that unit clarity. But again, I think it's just not going to quite come across that way. Granted, I personally don't have a solution for it, right? So let's also be fair in that regard here. Where we don't really, it's one thing to complain about things, but unless it's going to be constructive or you're going to provide a solution that's actually like has some thought behind it, you become a critic into a whiner, right? And so let's not be whiners here, but let's do fully understand that this fundamental issue is not really going to be solved with Company of Heroes 3. We're just going to have to accept it for the time being. But more importantly, what about gameplay? How do we differentiate between units versus another unit that does something different, right? Because really, with the nameplate system, it functions well enough. It is a solution to the problem, janky or not, like it or not, it does work. People still play this game. In fact, you can play this game quite comfortably, despite not fully understanding visually what a unit is. But eventually, you'll learn what it is, what you'll learn what it does, and you'll remember what its abstract symbol is on the nameplate, and you'll learn. You'll get over that curve, and you'll figure it out. Eventually, you dedicate the time and practice, and well, you play the game, right? So then, how do units differentiate themselves in the gameplay? Because if they all kind of look the same, they got to obviously feel and play differently, right? And there's still a fundamental issue here in that baseline functionality for the groups of units all end up being the same. All infantry will take cover behind stuff and they'll shoot their weapons at other infantry, and they are typically not effective versus vehicles. All infantry, to varying degrees, have that same baseline functionality. They take cover, they shoot their guns, pew pew. Now, that's sort of a gross, sort of like, oversimplification. Obviously, units are carrying different weapons, different rifles. One has a submachine gun, one doesn't. The submachine gun is better at close range. That all makes sense. Again, though, on the surface of it all, they quite literally do the same thing, but there are nuanced differences in how they function and interact with your opponent. Really, though, oh, in the same way, too, tanks and vehicles, you got one tank, right? Like if we were to back up to this symbol here, or this image here, right? Like these three tanks, ideally, they're shooting their cannon at other vehicles. Like the tanks, in the same way, baseline functionality, they shoot other vehicles, they shoot other tanks, and that's about it. And obviously, they can fight infantry and things like that, but like the cannon shoots other tanks. That's what it's designed for. That's like the real life application is you design the thing to do something specific. But as far as differentiating between three tanks, whose job is to shoot tanks, and they also kind of look visually the same, and they also got visually like the same nameplate symbols, and you sort of see where I'm going with this. It's kind of samey. So then, how does Company of Heroes really clearly distinct dignify between one squad and another, one vehicle and another? And it is through the command card, which is where you have all the buttons to push. This squad of infantry, he can build a thing and he can throw grenades and he can sprint because other infantries don't have legs. I don't know, don't have knees. But you can see here, this is really where the gameplay in Company of Heroes separates itself. How you can really separate the units from one another because they can be upgraded with different things. They can do different abilities. Here we got the same thing. This one can be upgraded with, a machine gun, and this one can build something too, and it can shoot this grenade, and it's got a Panzerfaust or whatever, and it's got medical supplies. Okay, cool, cool. And here's an engineer squad. They can build more stuff, and they get all these other upgrades, and they can repair stuff, and they got other things that they get when they vet up, and so kind of cool. This is really where Company of Heroes helps to, like, I think shines in that, like, almost every single unit that you're going to be interacting with and playing with will have some sort of unique special abilities that's unique to that particular squad. And now you understand why you build this squad over this squad in this particular situation, and why you build this tank over this tank, and things like that. We can sort of just quickly scroll through a bunch of them. Like this infantry squad can be upgraded with bazookas, and now they're half anti-infantry, half anti-vehicle, and they can throw smoke grenades and this bundle of dynamite because yes, right? And here's a tank. Right, and remember, keep in mind, this is all Company of Heroes 2 stuff right now. This tank can do something when it vets up, and so on and so forth. This vehicle can see red people, it can see red ghosts. As you can see here, this vehicle can do quite more. And things like that. How is Company of Heroes 3 going to stack up comparatively? I forgot to load up these other files here. How is Company of Heroes 3 going to differentiate themselves gameplay-wise? Here's a squad of infantry. The same thing. They all have the same core concept. Infantry can be upgraded with things. They can have abilities unlocked or purchased or whatever. But I want you to notice these two glowing symbols. And you're going to see these on pretty much every single unit card here for Company of Heroes 3. I think this is really where Company of Heroes 3 is going to take a step forward, where leaps and bounds has been made as far as unit clarity in gameplay. They're going to struggle visually. You can say what you want about all the other things, the lack of replays and spectator mode and blah 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 blah. We won't get into that yet. We'll get into that later on with the full game review when the game is actually released and we actually give us. But the first time your unit vets up, they will have a choice, and you will choose between one of their two veteran abilities. And once you commit to one, the other one is locked away forever. Locked away forever. What's really cool about that is now you have the same core element that helps your units separate themselves gameplay wise by having all the different upgrades and abilities and things like that can be purchased. And you still have the same mechanic of when they vet up, they unlock extra abilities, but because you're given a choice between one or two options, and the other one is permanently lost once you've made your choice, you can actually have units, the same unit, that differentiates itself from itself. Does that make sense? You can have two units, the same unit, but one can sprint and one can shoot extra bullets because both are vetted up, but you chose different options for them. And that adds a whole other layer of depth, essentially, to how units can be clarified through gameplay. And I think that's pretty cool. And I think you have to at least give credit to the fact that very simple thing that's going to help add additional depth to each individual unit. You're going to see, again, Same things, but every single unit will have that option. And that's what I got for you. Let me know what you think of this topic. Did you enjoy listening to me rant about game design issues and things like that? Kind of a really interesting problem that Company of Heroes has uniquely, right? Imagine if somebody made the same style of game, but it was Star Wars, right? It was sci-fi. You got units that are wearing bright white armor, and the dark troopers are wearing all black armor, and you can very clearly visually tell which unit is which, and things like that. Would you still need nameplates? Is there a way to design a game visually that you won't need nameplates, but still have the cover-based, squad-based system and things like that? So overall, kind of an interesting problem. Excited to see exactly what Company of Heroes brings to the table. I think they've had some good talks about what they're trying to do. And I'm really most excited for the fact that they're going to have this vet system where you have choices and things like that. So I appreciate you guys listening and hanging out with me. Let me know what you think. Is it a smaller problem? Am I making a big deal out of a problem that's not that big of a deal, right? Let me know. I appreciate it. February 23rd, I'll be there playing Company of Heroes 3. I will see you guys in the future.